Thanks a million. It's a real pleasure to be here. I suppose a bit of background. I have about 30 years experience of teaching large classes. So I teach a large first year class, which is about 450 to 500 students. I also teach fourth year classes like John with about 120. So I was kind of thinking about this, and I was thinking, and my area is information systems. So how do we engage students with thinking about ChatGPT? And it's already been hashed out and it's in the paper. You know, large group teaching has literature. Literature identifies problems. You're all familiar with them. But there's also literature that says we can moderate the problems by the pedagogical stance we take. Again, going back to the point, people who are here are interested in lecturing well. They already know this. Other papers by Roisin, you know, active learning. And what Rob did on student response systems, I also use VVox. So my paper is on the idea, how do we use VVox to essentially get students to be active learners on the topic of ChatGPT? Okay, so just to give a sense, this is a paper I'm presenting in the GAD conference in Valencia next week. But with students I had, I used open-ended questions to ask them what the benefits they identified from using VVox. This particular cohort, I use VVox every week. I asked them 40 different questions over the 12 weeks. The key point I would make is that essentially what it does is it makes the problems, so you're decreasing the arrow and increasing the moderator. So what you see is students are more engaged, there's more critical thinking, there's more active participation. Bringing that together with what we know about ChatGPT, point here is it's not just students who need to actually be educated on ChatGPT. One of the big news stories about 2 weeks ago is a professor in the US failed a lot of students because he asked ChatGPT how to produce the papers. And ChatGPT usefully said, yes, I absolutely may have produced those papers. Okay, so it's not just students, it's a broader context. So the first thing, and just picking up what Rob said in VVox, the big change in polling software in the last few years is you can ask open-ended questions, and you can also do word clouds. So you're not confined to multiple choice, you're not confined to answers. So you now have a chance to really engage students with questions. Okay, so my premise here is you need to engage the students to think about the question, get them answer it, show the responses on the screen, and then you give them what the answer is. But there's a huge learning. Students will always say, oh, I knew that when you present something. Whereas if you make them think about it in advance, that changes their learning. So I suppose there's a tutorial here for some of you who are looking at ChatGPT. So the question I would ask them is, how does ChatGPT come up with answers to the questions posed to it? One of the things I would say is I always use, if you don't know, type in don't know. Students should be allowed to say, I don't know. And the point you're saying is that's great, you're here to learn, but they should have, and this comes back to the anonymity that Rob talked about. So the question structure is very important, is what the literature would say, you know, which the idea, and I think open questions enable active learning if asked properly, and important to make students feel comfortable saying, I don't know. The key learning that I would say that I would be imparting on is essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. And this is from George Box, he's called himself an accidental statistician. He essentially did the plotting for anti-aircraft guns in the UK during World Battle of Britain. Okay, but his point is no model is perfectly correct, but some of them are useful. The learning is for the student, and I think it's pointless thinking students are not going to use ChatGPT. They will use ChatGPT. And they may justifiably use it to improve the English on their CV. So they will use it, not necessarily from academic intent. Okay, so after you've explained it to them, you know, ChatGPT is essentially, you know, a large language model. What does that mean? It essentially statistically predicts the next word. Okay, which is what I've underlined. And the key point here to get across to students, my answers may not be always perfect or 100% accurate. Now that's when I submitted the paper on the 24th of the 2nd, 2023. I re-asked the question before this. It's a totally different answer. It's the next point with ChatGPT. You will get a different answer on the basis of how it's learning. But what's interesting is ChatGPT is coming more forthright with the criticisms that have been leveled at it, that essentially it's taken from a wide range of internet text. We don't know the sources, and it doesn't understand the text. Okay, so again, getting students to think about this, and if they don't know what a large language model is or they don't know what the model is, that's a huge change. Now they have to think about, is this model fit for purpose for what I wanted to do? The second question I would ask, because we do a lot, obviously all of you do it on plagiarism and the idea of trusted sources. Is it a trusted source of information? ChatGPT tells you it's not a trusted source of information. Okay, so it's basically saying there are many times when my response is not completely accurate or up to date. Again, that's the 24th of the 2nd, 2023. Earlier this week, now it's getting very real and saying, yeah, I have potential for misinformation. I lack human judgment. Again, the learning here from the students is now it's not the go-to tool that they thought it was. But the second learning to some extent is ChatGPT is changing its answers. So to vary it up, what I would suggest for the third one, and again with VVox, you can ask a Likert scale. How well does ChatGPT provide supporting reference for the arguments? Again, see what the students come up with. It's always useful to get that sense of what the class thinks, particularly when you're in a large class. What is the mood of the class? Again, showing I did essentially 3 questions taken from, so you can say, yeah, I took 3 questions from the first year exam that you're going to sit in 12 weeks time. I asked it for 5 references for each. All of the references were bogus and made up. Do you really want to use this source from that point of view? Will ChatGPT always provide an answer to questions posed? Okay. So here, for your own discipline, I'd pick something that's totally unconnected. So for those, if there's a kind of a cultural context here, cultural context in Ireland is Rag Week used to be a way of raising money for charity about 30 years ago. Now it's essentially where students party for a week, and it has a very negative reputation. So ChatGPT 24th of the 2nd, 2022 said, yeah, no, there's definitely no connection between Rag Week and essentially traditional systems development lifecycle. That's from my own area. How do we develop information systems? ChatGPT had learned, because by the 6th of the 6th, it could actually connect traditional systems development lifecycle and Rag Week. There is no connection between these two concepts. Under any struggle, there is no connection. Again, it's picking a fun example for students to say, oh, wow, now I need to really think about this. Okay. So what's the reflections, the implications for practice? I've thought a lot about this. And the problem with ChatGPT is the less you know, the less you can evaluate the answers from ChatGPT. But the more you think as a student you need it, the more you know, the more you can evaluate the answers, but the less useful it is. So this gets into the automation argument in terms of, when you use automation. The overall goal of then going back to George Box is essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. Okay. My overall goal is to get them to have a different understanding of ChatGPT coming out than they had before. Lecturing to them will not do it because they're in passive mode. Get them into active mode, and essentially now I have to think about this before I get an answer. And if you use VVox, you can see the number of responses. So you can literally just wait until essentially the number of responses is where you want it to be. If you have a lecturer as a notion, any chance that you're going to stop generative AI, forget it. ChatGPT is just the beginning. Microsoft has already launched its Microsoft 360 Copilot. What's it going to do? It's the large language model, which is ChatGPT. It's going to actually now connect into your documents and will be available through Microsoft 365. Are we going to say to students, you can't use Microsoft Word? Okay. And this is from, one of the chief architects from Microsoft. So what they're now saying is, now you're moving the bar. Essentially, you don't have to, start at average. You essentially, with AI, you start with good and you move up. Copilot can create drafts. So the bottom line for me is generative AI is here to stay. It is going to be used and has already been used in business and other applications. Students are going to use it. We should educate them concerning it. So that's it. Just Roisin raised an interesting question on using Excel, just in terms of you can literally do very simple coding in Excel. If you have your responses, just write in a column here and put in a key term for it and then sum them up. So you don't have to get very advanced to essentially look at this kind of stuff. So that's how I used it for the others. That's it.